All right. So thank you for those of you who are able to join us today. Today is the beginning of our Lunch and Learn series on cultural competence, working with diverse populations. And we're really lucky to have with us today Bryan Nurnberger with Simply Smiles and his colleague, Gaby Chavez Hernandez. And you know what, Gaby, I've never actually called you by your full name. I've only ever said Gaby. So I hope I got that correct.
Yes.
What we'll do is ask Bryan and Gaby to just give us a little bit of background, to share who they are, what they do, and then we'll ask them some specific questions related to Simply Smiles and their work and some of the insights and lessons learned along the way. So Bryan, I'm going to turn it over to you and let you get us started.
Sure. So thanks for having me today, and Gaby today. Susan, I'm excited to reconnect with you guys after, our pandemic enforced break. So my name is Bryan Nurnberger. I'm the president and founder of Simply Smiles. We began the organization in 2003, and we build villages of foster homes, which I'm excited, Gaby and I are excited to tell you about today. And we've had a long-standing relationship with UWSP. And so we're very grateful for that and looking forward to what today holds and what the future holds.
And go ahead, Gaby, if you want to introduce yourself.
Okay. Well, thank you, Susan, and thank you to the whole class, for inviting us to be the first speaker for this series. My name is Gabriela, but everyone calls me Gaby. So I'm from Oaxaca, and this is where I am now. And I have been involved with Simply Smiles for close to 20 years now. But Simply Smiles has been a huge part of my life, and I'm now the director of the Children's Village in Oaxaca, Mexico. And that is what I'm doing at this moment. And I'm happy to be part of this conversation. And if you guys have any questions, I'm happy to respond.
Excellent.
So thank you for inviting us.
Thank you. So Bryan, I'm going to ask you first, what kind of sparked your work with Simply Smiles? How did this develop? What was the impetus?
Yeah, so when I was in my early 20s, I was a professional mountain climber. So I was a guide for Eastern Mountain Sports. I professionally climbed mountains, and that was my whole life. It's all I ever wanted to do. And so I was young, but I was doing that, and I got some injuries from climbing. And so I needed to take a break. My body needed a break to recuperate. So I decided that I'm from Connecticut originally. I would fly from Connecticut to the border of Texas and Mexico, and then I would spend however many months I decided I wanted to traveling Mexico and recuperating. And so I did that. I flew to the northern part of Mexico and started working my way down through the mountains, through the Sierra Madre and the Sierra Occidental mountain ranges, and marking on a map where there were places I could climb once I was recuperated. And so for a number of months, I worked my way through the mountains and ended up in Oaxaca, which is the southernmost state of Mexico, and basically stumbled upon, how it is when you're traveling, series of leads, you talk to people, a children's home. What I guess, we would call colloquially, an orphanage. And, there were kids living, and I knocked on the door. Called them up, knocked on the door. However, I got in there and asked if they needed a volunteer. And in my mind, I was thinking for the day. And that turned into a number of months that I was there, and got to know the kids. There were upwards of 70 children living there, some of whom had nobody else in the world, and others of whom were there for the opportunity, because it's Oaxaca State, which is huge. It's like the size of the Northeast of the United States, and then it's Oaxaca City. and which is the city in the center of the state. And so this children's home was in the city. And so there were kids who were living there who came there from remote places of the state, just to have opportunity for education, et cetera. And so, I stayed as long as I possibly could. And, my father flew me home when I needed to get home. And when I got back home to the United States, I suddenly didn't care about mountain climbing at all. It was as if a switch had been shut off. And I realized, instantly that in its place, that passion for climbing was replaced by a passion to do something to support those children. And I realized through my privilege, children like them, and formed Simply Smiles.
I love that, how your passion for mountains turned into a passion for people.
It just flipped,
And it's so interesting even that you started out as a professional mountain climber. I don't think many of us know anyone who that is their chosen profession. So
yeah, I don't know how long it would have lasted. So it was probably a blessing in disguise.
I love it. So Gaby, how did you meet Bryan, and what made you want to work with Simply Smiles? Of all the things that you might have done with your life, why Simply Smiles?
Well, I guess, what Bryan just ended up saying, it is very tied to, my life. And it was because, from those many kids that Bryan just spoke about, one of those kids was me. I grew up in the children's home, and that is where I met Bryan, and I met, Kristen, who is Bryan's wife. And so when I met Bryan, I was in middle school, and so the time came that I had to go to college. And so there were situations that it made it like impossible for me to go to college here in Oaxaca. So that is when, Simply Smiles offer a scholarship to, the opportunity for me to go and study in the US. And so I took that, opportunity. And so I went to college on like a Simply Smiles scholarship to Connecticut. So that was in 2008. I lived there for like 7 years. Of course, I had to learn English before, taking college classes. And so it was like a long 7 years, but May 2015, I finished college. And so, that was the other point that I had to make, a decision. And I guess, the day that I left Oaxaca and, be able to go to another country to college, I knew that, I wanted to do something, back. And of course, I spoke with Bryan about the opportunity for me to, stay with Simply Smiles. And so that was, the decision that I made, that, the opportunity that Simply Smile had given me during those years, I wanted to be part of that for other kids, that they were still back in Oaxaca. And so that is what we are doing. We are trying to do at this point here in Oaxaca. And now, seeing 2 of our kids being in college, that is the circle that I want to be part of. Yeah.
That is such a great story. It just goes to show you never know when you might make a connection and who you might meet in your life, and how that comes around and again becomes part of your life's journey. So I think that's just what we would call an FCS success. So it's a wonderful way, like you said, Gaby, to be able to give back. But kudos to you for not only graduating college, but doing so in a second language. I mean, college is hard enough in your first language. So I think that's just amazing. And I think that should give everyone some inspiration and motivation as well to do their best and make it happen. So Bryan, tell us a little bit how your work in Oaxaca then became work in South Dakota.
Yeah, so the original intention was to form the organization Simply Smiles to support the children at the Casa Hogar Children's Home, where Gaby grew up. But the response was tremendous from people back in the United States. People would give us money and offer donations and want to come down and volunteer. And I was 24, so I was just responding to the momentum that was happening. And fortunate, to be in a position in my life where, I could just say, okay, well, I'm just going to do this full time. I'm not going to dilute it. I'm not going to take baby steps. Let's just see what happens. And so, things expanded in Mexico as we encountered needs. We helped to launch a second children's home under the umbrella of that first, children's home. We worked with a community of 127 people who were surviving off of what they picked out of the garbage dump in Oaxaca, and we built them all houses and did tremendous amounts of work with them. We went down deep, deep, deep into the mountains of Mexico, into these villages, bamboo huts, and we did large scale emergency food aid, tons, literally tons, 10, 12 tons of food every month, built schools there, did large scale medical interventions to treat for parasitic infection. We built over 100 latrines in the regions that people would have a place to go to the bathroom and not get infected. And so we were just responding to needs and learning how to work with communities that were very challenging to work with, both their geography, language. Gaby's English is actually Gaby's third language. She speaks Zapotec, Spanish, English, and there was language barriers, and we learned how to work in these communities. And that's one of the benefits of starting something so young. It's not like, oh, I got a ticking clock here, I got to get this work done. I know we were able to go slowly and appropriately. It took us a year. My wife, Kristen, and I went to the dump in Mexico to visit that community every day for a year to build relationships before we started working with them. So that's who we were up until about 2009. I think I'm the worst at the chronology ever. Like when Gaby said 2008, she could have said like 1961. I would have been like, all right, if she says so. But so Kristen, my wife's a touring musician, and she started to do a lot of shows, performances, where she would overlap with a Native American performer named Turgeson Ghost Horse. And so we became friendly with Turgeson, and Turgeson started to needle me to bring Simply Smiles to the Cheyenne River Reservation in South Dakota, where he was born and where his mother was still living. And actually, just before this, he called me randomly while waiting for an egg sandwich in New York City, and we just were catching up before this Zoom. But Turgeson started needling me, and eventually I said, Turgeson, like, we're friends, and I'm just going to tell you, like, we just finished like building schools in the mountains. Like, that's what we do. Like, we're not going to South Dakota, like, where there's paved roads in the United States. And he said, just go. So he took us out to the reservation and in South Dakota, which is where I am right now. And I don't think it's hyperbole to say, like, within minutes, I knew that we were going to put the full weight and breadth of the organization into working in Indian country as well. And so it was Turgeson who brought us here to Cheyenne River.
Another great example of connections, right? You never know. You hadn't purposefully met him, and he had no idea that you would be someone that he would be inviting into their space. And again, it's those relationships that make all the difference, because any of the work that we want to do can't happen if there aren't relationships and individuals who accept what you're interested in doing, and again, that you're responding based on their needs, not on your preconceived notions of what should be done. So Bryan, can you talk a little bit about how long the relationships took in South Dakota? You would think that it would be really simple, right? It's in the United States, we speak
Sure.
English, not so.
No, and and same in all communities, no matter what the level of resistance is. I know from your notes in advance, Susan, we wanted to talk about kind of how to approach these things, for students as they graduate and as they choose the direction in their life. And we should have Gaby speak to this in a bit too, but like how important pace is and patience and putting yourself in the position where you can be the most effective. For myriad reasons, Gaby is going to be far more effective than any of us would ever be in her position. But we met Gaby when she was in middle school and 7 years in the United States. And it's a long time for her to then be positioned to have this tremendous impact. So I think it's about patience and what you do during that time of patience, in listening. And so so we definitely want to pivot back to Gaby and her impact, as a Oaxacan woman who grew up in a similar environment of these kids. We build things around flesh and blood, Gaby, not brick and mortar. But just so we don't lose a thread in terms of the reservation, I had no idea about Indian country being from the East Coast. And when I came out here, I said, okay, well, the reservation is huge. It's the size of Connecticut, but there's only 8,000 people here. And we'll just work across the whole reservation. Like whatever needs to be done, we'll do it. How hard can it be? There's some paved roads and it's just driving. Let's just do it. And we very quickly, got a massive adult-sized dose of reality. Not the lack of trust from outsiders, which we understand because of the history, with Native Americans in this country, the broken promises historically, but perhaps more impactfully continuously. This group comes out, that college comes out, this church comes out, this government program, they all say they're going to do something, and very honestly, they almost never comes to fruition, or it comes to fruition in a manner that's not what the population desires. And so, we could talk about this for novels, but long story short, it took us, we narrowed down to one town, and we said, maybe we can get a foothold in this town of about 150 people called La Plante, and try to win one person over, get trust from one person to the next person, and try to build a chain reaction of trust. And that was 11 years ago, I guess now. So it took us a decade to get to the point where we could identify what need we could fulfill and then be able to fulfill it. And we finally landed in a place where that is our children's villages and providing, foster care for Native children that's appropriate for Native children and that keeps them with their communities.
Awesome. So some real key points from what Bryan just talked about patience and listening. In our culture, we tend to want to do things quickly and we want results. People, when you're working with individuals, it's hard to rush those things and it takes time. It might take decades. Not a lot of people have that kind of patience. And so Gaby, as you think about, again, the amount of time that you've been a part of all of this and the time that you have invested back in your home city and state, tell us a little bit about that pace. Does it feel like it's been slow or does it feel appropriate? How have you helped to build trust, and how is your position unique, being from the location where you're working? You're not an outsider, you're an insider. So I'll throw that, as Bryan was alluding to. Tell us more about your position and how that works where you are.
Yeah, so I guess, as I mentioned, I have been involved with Simply Snows for like many years, and I actually was able to make like a few trips out to the reservation, so, I can see both, sides on this situation. But I guess from my experience, yes, these many years in some ways have been like helpful, to try to understand, what is the pace of, how to do things or how to handle, each situation. but in other ways is you don't really fully realize what the pace will be until you are in the situation. And so I'm referring to that when I came back to Oaxaca. um, I came back to Oaxaca knowing that I kind of knew what to expect or how to handle each situations. But the truth is that yes, it was good for me because I live in a home with many kids. There was no issue for me to share like a bathroom. But in other ways, like I came here knowing that like I was like 25, I'm not a parent and I had no idea, how to, take care of kids, and so that was, the challenge, because, I always said to, people who come, who visit, the kids, relatives, but mostly, visitors, about my experience on coming back to Oaxaca, and just, realizing that yes, the culture is like a big difference. And also, the pace how we're gonna take things, and yes, like I was experienced in this sort of like a lifestyle, but the reality is that, I'm not working, for like a company who makes things, like such as like a chair or a couch, and so I'm working trying to, raise humans, and so that is like a big part of this job, and so that is the scary part because, who knows, sometimes I sort of know what I'm doing, but sometimes I don't, and so that is where like I really, have like respect for parents. I always, now that I call my parents, it's just like, okay, like now, I have respect for you because, this is not easy, but, I think, we are going back to how we take things and how we learn things is that, I think through the time I kind of like had to take, one day at a time, not losing, the focus of what is your goal. And so for us as a Simplicity Mouse, I think is, the approach of like a family, and so that is like the main goal, that these kids come to us and so they feel welcome in like a family. But in the day-by-day activities is that you sort of have to follow how the kid is feeling today, if it's in a good move or like a bad move, so you sort of had to try to balance those two things, now of course not losing one from another one. And so that is the big lesson that I have learned. And Bryan is not gonna let me, die. But like at the beginning, like I think like the first 18 to like 2 years, it was like hard, because you don't know what you get into. So, but like it's close to 5 years that I have been, back in Oaxaca, and so of course, like nothing is perfect, but I think one thing is that like now I'm more, um, like I more secure, and more, excited to see, the kids and to just like knowing that, I'm being part of, their life, and the step that they are taking is like a big step, as parents, the kids go like first day of kindergarten, like it's a milestone. And so it's the same, milestone that we see each day, each like end of the school year for the kids here. And so that is, those milestones are part of, what Simply Smiles family has, becoming for the last 5 years here in Oaxaca.
I love that. As you were talking about, you're building humans. You're not building widgets or chairs or a product. So it's very different kind of work, and it is slow, and it is challenging. Like you said, like a parent, you are that substitute for those children, and such meaningful work that you're doing, and it's hard. Having been a parent, and my children are now 30 and 34, it never gets easier. It's just different milestones, but you still care, and it's just something new all the time. So Bryan and Gaby are kind of the face of South Dakota and Mexico that we have with us today, but they don't do this work alone. So Bryan, if you'll tell us a little bit about kind of the other people who work with you, and how you have had to really intentionally address diversity, inclusion, and equity with your staff, as well as with the populations that you serve.
Yeah, absolutely. It is extremely, extremely challenging. And as Gaby said, we pursue perfect, but we get what we get. And I'll say this because I think it's the best indicator of what our intentions are. Right now in Mexico, it is a 100% Mexican run and indigenous run. But that took a long time, a very, very long time. And it's not because of capability. It's because of capacity and privilege. Like what 24-year-old can go down to, can go somewhere, see a need, then come back and just be like, give me money, and people pour money on you, and then you use it to make a difference in the world. Like that's privilege. And that does tie to race, and it does tie to equality, but it's about how we use and leverage that privilege and those inequities. And so I think Mexico is a great indicator and evidence of where we're going. Now, if you use the reservation as the other, kind of arm of the organization, it also ties back to patience and pace, because it is way, way, way muddier and more resistance. I mean, it's very challenging to work in Oaxaca, don't get me wrong. But what's missing there is nobody blamed me and my ancestors for the economic poverty in Oaxaca. It's as simple as that. Whereas on the reservation in Indian country, it's people who look like me historically that have caused these inequities and these problems. So again, then we say, well, okay, let's listen, let's take our time, let's together with the community determine what actions we can take that our privilege makes possible, and then take those actions. The challenge is that if you've never lived in economic poverty, and you've never carried the weight of acute trauma, and you've never carried the weight of historical trauma, and you've never lived in a place that's, a 2-hour drive from Walmart, and the list of things goes on, we cannot, if you've never experienced that, we can't understand the amount of time and effort that it takes just to survive the day. So what we had was space. Our privilege allowed for space to do the work that needed to be done on the reservation. And then hopefully that work then is successful in that it creates space for Native people to step in and be difference makers with their hands as well. Now, don't get me wrong, they're already difference makers when they sit with you and advise you and teach you and welcome you. But then to plug in and be part of the staff, to plug in and be foster parents, and to plug in and to eventually run the whole thing, that's the space that our efforts are creating. And so for a child who grows up with us in one of our foster homes on the reservation, hopefully with a Native American family, life will be a life of opportunity and choices and the space to do what they want to do, not what they need to do just to survive. And that's how everything changes. And I'll punctuate this answer just by saying, when and if the story of, Simply Smiles is written about how the efforts that we're making on Shine River, have changed this place, I would hope that me as the founder that I'm an asterisk in that story. And that the story is really about that child who grew up with us and chose to, through the opportunities that were given to them, chose to be the one who actually determined what the difference needed to be made and made that difference. I think that's our barometer of success. And we may not, it may not be within our lifetimes that you see it happening, but that's another part of that patience that you just have to accept and say, that's the way to do this. That's the only way to do this. And it's the way to do it correctly.
So we'd like to see more Gabys, that a child
Right.
has been able to be the recipient of some of these opportunities and then give back and be the change leaders in their own community.
That's right.
Absolutely.
And what's important, Susan, is that that's done without a quid pro quo. Like, it can't be if you, hey, because Simply Smiles did this, now you have to do this. So Gaby is family, and Gaby can attest, we're always joking around and whatnot, but I never joked ever about her in 7 years about her coming to work for Simply Smiles. Even though in the back of my head, I was like, boy, would it be great if Gaby decided to come work for Simply Smiles. Like, I never even wanted to joke or hint around the edges or tacit anything about that, because I didn't want to plant the seeds of any tit for tat, or that anybody owed anything. But Gaby made that choice, and I'll tell you the story just because we're just sitting here chatting. Gaby was out on the reservation. By the way, she could have gone home to Oaxaca for the summer, but she chose during college to come out to the reservation and work with us and help us get this impossibility started out here. And she was coming up to graduation. You're right, exactly. Isn't that weird?
And she's an amazing cook too. I should just throw that out. Some of the best food I ever ate was prepared by Gaby.
Even when the power goes out and she has to make it all on breakfast on the grill, she's like, yeah, no problem. But Gaby, just, quickly, Gaby, I was like, okay, it's time to talk to Gaby about what's next, the first time broaching that subject. And so she came with me on a run to Rapid City, which is like 3.5 hours. So we went there, we do what we needed to do. And then on the way back, I had determined in my head that when we hit this certain radio tower in the prairie, there's not a lot of landmarks, I was going to start, and talk to Gaby about, what's next, and make sure she understood it wasn't a quid pro quo, but that there was a job for her if she wanted it. And so she sensed it. So we get to this radio tower and I start to broach it, and she says, stop. You don't need to do this. I want to work for Simply Smiles. And that's how it all happened.
So you had a sixth sense, Gaby. You knew that this was coming.
Yeah, sometimes.
You didn't share when you went to college. What was the degree that you pursued, and was that something that you were thinking of at the time that you went to college, that you might use your college degree when you were done?
Well, I got my college degree in business administration. Yeah, and so I think it's very sort of like funny, but also interesting, because I grew up in like a very remote village from Oaxaca. It's like 3 hours, from Oaxaca City, and so I remember, as a kid, I wanted to be, a doctor. Maybe when I was like, 6, but it was, but now like I have no interest in, on medical, career. But, I think I had that idea because, in our village, I had no, opportunity to see other people, engineer or architect, I was exposed to only see, the doctor of our clinic, back in the village, and then my teacher, and so, that was my dream when I was a little girl. But once I came to Oaxaca City, my sort of like a mind was open to other opportunities. And so I just wanted to do business. First, in high school here in Oaxaca, you have like a chance to sort of like take one class, well, I guess several classes, but like it's like you can sort of like try to figure out what you want to do, because the system here in Mexico in general, we don't have that like lecture that you have in the US, that once you go into college, here in Mexico, you had to stick with it, so you have no chance to like transfer credit or change your mind on like majors, and some credits can go with that. Once you start, if you want to be an accountant, you had to finish. If you change your mind in your second year, you had to go back, and do everything all over again, so that was helpful, for me, because in high school I took, my concentration was in accounting, and I really, love accounting. I love numbers, but I, with, what I know what accountants do is like, I don't want to be in like sitting in a room, for like 8 hours a day, So, I figured out, okay, like I want to do business because, that have like a broader, I guess, chance of doing something in the future. And so that was, the process of deciding what to go for in college.
Well, I can appreciate the not wanting to just sit and do numbers. I was an accountant for 4.5 years, so I get that. Even though we're working with people, it is a nonprofit business, but it is a business, and you do have to manage a lot of different components, so that background is helpful. That being said, it takes many talents to make this all work, Bryan. So if you can talk about, who are some of the other people and what work do they do in the organization, and maybe how our students could become involved, or what potential positions you might have in your organization.
Well, the timing's perfect because we're hiring. So Hallie, you get the first choice because you're the only one who showed live. So any job you want in the organization, you're first in line. But so Gaby has a whole team, and that's a whole nother story. We could do a series of these. She could talk about, the challenges of finding a team to do this kind of work, that of purpose. And, so Gaby has a whole team that she manages. So talk about business management in Mexico, people who cook and care for the kids and et cetera. So that's a whole side of things. Then in the United States, we currently have our headquarters, which is in Connecticut, and we have support staff in our office in Connecticut. People who do the books, marketing people, program support people, et cetera. Then here on the reservation, where we're working day and night to launch what's never been done before, which is this village model here. I've moved to South Dakota to be hands-on, to do this. We have our clinical director who's in charge of the mental health offerings, who lives here on site. We have our senior program manager, Zach, who started as a volunteer with us, became an intern, became a staff member. Now he's our senior program manager. He's here. And then we're actively hiring the foster parents, additional mental health staff, and management for the village. So those are the positions that are on our website at this moment and available. And so if you'll allow me, we're looking for someone who wants to, basically be the Gaby, high bar, extremely high bar, but someone who wants to say, this is I'm owning this. and I'm going to make this village what it's intended to be and make it great and manage the day-to-day. We're looking for clinical staff, that is therapists, social workers who can come in and provide the actual hands-on day-to-day therapy, mental health care for the children. And all the details of that position are on the website. We're looking for relief caregivers. Now, these are people who will come in to the village and basically be substitute foster parents, and who will say, you know, for the next 4 hours while the parents have an appointment or they have date night or whatever it may be, will step in and care for the kids, or for a few days. And then this is the core of it. We've professionalized foster parenting, meaning that when we hire you to be a foster parent at the Simply Smiles Children's Village, it's your full-time job. So there's a salary, and there's retirement, and there's health insurance, all those things, so that you can focus all of your energies, all of your efforts, all of your passion on raising these most needy kids. And so we build beautiful homes, you live in the home, it's your own home, and you raise these children. So first of all those positions are available on our website. But one thing that I'm excited about starting as we really launch this village on the reservation in earnest, and this is for both locations, which is creating a conduit from universities like UWSP, where, let's just use social work for an example, but it can be myriad majors that are applicable to caring for children and working in the not-for-profit field. Let's be honest, you know, you come out of college, you've paid all this money, you've done all this work, and you know, your resume is like, college degree, and I worked at the Sunglass Hut in the summer, you know, like it can be challenging to find a job. Well, we're working on, and would love to work with UWSP to create this, a program where students can come out of school and then do almost like something that's analogous to the Peace Corps, and come and together with a teammate, with a partner, live in one of our foster homes and be hired by Simply Smiles and be foster parents for a term, a 2-year term, to care for these children. And to have that as a transition, and also to have it as an experience builder, and also as a resume item. So we also have you know, a budding program that we love to work with UWSP to develop, where we create that conduit, where we have students who are sophomores and juniors and are already preparing to apply for and take one of those positions when they get out. And so there's a lot of opportunity to work with Simply Smiles, and I would just encourage anyone who wants to learn more just to go to simplysmiles.org, and you can reach out to us directly. And it's not like we're, you know, Google, like you're going to talk to us directly on the chat or via the contact, and start a conversation with us and see where we can apply your passions and talents to the work that we do here on the reservation, and also in Mexico. And by the way, sorry, we also have a wonderful board of directors. We have a humongous board of advisors that's all Native people who steer the ship. And the pandemic, we have about 400 volunteers per year who will spend between a week and 3 months living with us in Mexico or on the reservation. So it's this massive team army that makes all of this possible, and everyone bringing their passions and talents forward.
I love it. Well, we're so excited about all the work that's being done in both of those locations and serving a real need, and doing so with that lens of equity and inclusion and diversity, which is absolutely key to make this work. Any last words of advice for our students who are pursuing human services professions, or any other actions that they could take right now, today?
Go ahead, Gaby.
Well, I think, you know, one of my advice for these students is like, just, you know, take it and go for it, you know, because I think sometimes it can be very easy to say, like, I'm not experienced in this, you know, work, in this life, but, you know, you're gonna get to it anyway, you know, so why wait, you know, 2 or 3 years into, you know, you can do, you know, something that is, you know, good for the world out, but also good for yourself, you know, because, you know, I think when I see that, you know, my work or my responsibility is hard, is, sometimes it's feel impossible. I try to remember that, this is, the best that you can do, and knowing that, you are learning into the day by day, living. And so, I think that is the best part of it. And so, yes, I'm not saying that other jobs are bad, or, but I think, at the end of, our lives is, it doesn't matter what you had, but it matters what you did, And so I think, as I say, I think for me it's easier to say it like now, because, I can see, the reactions that our kids are having, that the impact that, me, but also like the Simply Smiles community and, team is making into this kid's life. When you see a kid that prefers to stay with you and not with her father, it's like a huge impact. And so if, a college student is there, sort of like trying to decide, whether this is for me, also like if it's not for you, you're gonna come to realize, that this is not, but at least you try, you say that this is what I did. And so, there is always like second chances. But if, the nonprofit is your call, or if, you are thinking about it, like, yes, do it now. So, that is my advice. And I'm very happy that I took that path, because now, like I can, as you say, like now I manage, about 10 people here in Oaxaca, and so like the next time, or next whatever is there, for me, I can even say that to you, that, if I did not took this responsibility, 6 years ago, I would not be saying this today. And so that is the advantage of, taking risks, taking chances, so that
I
is.
love it. Well, our motto is definitely say yes. You don't know if you don't try, and you may not be able to do everything perfectly, but you will make a difference. So I think that's great advice. Thanks, Gaby. And Bryan.
Yeah, I mean, I can't say it better than Gaby, but I would say, I am, so I'm 43 now. And, it's like you get a pretty good perspective and you look at those around you. And where I've landed is that there's nothing more valuable than purpose in your life. And if you get up every day and with a purpose, and that your life is driven by purpose, then you're pretty much going to find yourself in a good spot. And, that's simplifying it down. We could talk about, again, pivoting back to privilege and college degrees. And, it's not like the money in life is just sitting on the ground and you go pick it up. But when you come from the place of education, the money comes. The money's not hard, and, humans always want more. And so, and money is problematic in that department because it's more and more and bigger and never enough. But if you apply that human nature of always wanting more to purpose and to impact, then you're pretty much going to find yourself in an okay place in life. And I think there's also a misconception that to enter into the not-for-profit world and to do this kind of work, you have to, take a vow of poverty and live like Mother Teresa. And it's simply untrue. Our staff saves for retirement and, eats sushi when they want to, and every day gets up and knows that their finite amount of minutes on Earth are being used for impact and for purpose and for good. And there's no ambiguity about how they use their life's minutes. And I think when you're making a choice of what your career is, if you can find a place where you live in that realm of purpose and impact, you're going to be okay. And so come work for Simply Smiles is what I would say.
Well, that just fits so perfectly with our university's motto of discover your purpose.
Oh, perfect.
And all the reasons why that's beneficial. So thinking back to being that 24-year-old Bryan, did you ever envision that this is where you would be at 43?
I would say a step before that, when I was a mountain climber, no, because that was just so in a whole nother box. I just figured I would do that until, I fell off a mountain at some point, and that would be, that. But I didn't think I would be on an Indian reservation, but from the day that I felt like I threw the hat over the wall and committed to Simply Smiles, I said, well, I think we can take this somewhere. And so what I never projected was how many incredible people would come into our orbit and make this work possible. Whether it's Gaby, obviously, as at the forefront of that, or every one of our volunteers. It's an absolutely incredible thing, and it's an honor that the organization has such a gravitational pull that would pull you, Susan, and the university and everybody else into it to make the work possible. So I never imagined it would have that kind of impact so broadly, and I'm just honored that it did, and that hopefully there are decades more work to be done.
I love it. You're just climbing new mountains, different mountains.
Exactly.
But before we go, Haley, you have been with us. If you have any questions that you specifically want to be able to ask, I want to give you that opportunity to do so. I could just listen to Bryan and Gaby talk about the work that they do forever, but I know that you do have work to do, so we can't hold you up too long. And I do hope that students will reach out. I have provided them with the website so that they can to look things over. And we will be encouraging those relationships and take those words that you've shared with us to heart for sure. Haley, any last comments from you or questions?
Unfortunately, I don't have any questions because they were all answered, but thank you for sharing.
Awesome.
Thanks,
well,
Haley.
We really appreciate your time, and I look forward to seeing you again in person as soon as we possibly can. But thanks for being here with us virtually. Good to see you.
Thank
Bye,
you,
Bryan.
Susan.
Bye, Gaby.
See you, Gabs.